Welcome to the Student Loan Planner podcast. I am Lauryn Williams, one of the consultants with Student Loan Planner. I work on Thursdays and Fridays, so you may have done a consultation with me, but if you haven't, don't be afraid to jump on the calendar. Today, I am joined by a fellow Student Loan Planner consultant, Dan Rooker. Me and Dan are going to be talking about how to determine a new normal after a pandemic. Dan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Lauryn. Looking forward to recording this podcast with you. And the three things that we're going to focus on today are measuring your new financial normal, whatever that is, looking at your goals post-pandemic, and then also talking about relationships today and post-pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's really important to bring up that some people may be saying like the new normal after the pandemic. When is the after coming? Still feels like we're knee deep in pandemic, Lauryn and Dan. You know, that may very well be true, but I think it's really important for us from an attitude standpoint to have something to look forward to. And, you know, we are seeing signs that things are going to get better and that this pandemic will at some point be behind us. And we need to be ready to rock and roll as soon as that happens. All right, so let's just jump right in and talk about measuring your new financial normal. How do we think about measurements as it pertains to finances in general, and what should we be thinking about, Dan?
I think that if you are trying to measure your new financial normal, probably the easiest way to do it is to use a tool that exists out there. And you might have a free tool available to you through your bank or your credit card statements. Like if you're at Chase, I know that they will send you different categories that you're spending in. Those categories are just guesses. So it's probably a good idea to go in and maybe change the categories that they auto-assigned based on what you purchased or where you traveled to. You can also use stronger tools than what your bank provides, like Mint or Personal Capital. If you're doing that, those are heavily dependent on how you assign money coming in and money going out. And I know from personal experience with your money's coming in from maybe more than one source, and then you're paying for things with maybe more than one card. And if you're, whatever you're doing, if you're credit card hacking or you just happen to have more than one card, or you and your significant other have multiple cards, it can be really confusing. So spending some time and knowing that you're going to have to commit some time to measuring it, using a tool is still going to take a long time. You could always go back to Google Sheets or Excel, but I'd say that that's an even larger commitment of time, even if it feels more simple at first.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you find a way of measurement that is appropriate for you, but you can't say, oh, nothing works and not measure anything at all, because then it's really hard to measure your progress as it relates to what could be your new normal. Myself and I think most of the other consultants are big YNAB fans. So that actually changed the trajectory of my overall finances as I got into the industry. I stumbled upon it, and being able to know where all my dollars are going, like you said, this fluctuating income situation, like, okay, well, this is what I have to work with, and this is where the different categories are, being able to prioritize what I wanted to pay or take care of. And, you know, now I even have like a travel fund, which I know we'll talk about vacation a little bit later, but YNAB has been a really cool tool for me to be able to get a good understanding of where my dollars are going, and then to reassign them and put them in different areas.
Absolutely. And you do want to, you know, we jumped right into the tools that you can use. You do want to make sure that you are intentional with measuring. A lot of people don't like to make a budget. It's not a fun, cool thing to do. Mm-hmm. It's not I don't enjoy creating a budget and measuring things. And so I can imagine someone who just doesn't enjoy numbers would really find this exercise taxing. But if you can do it just once, just to start tracking or just to see what the picture looks like, and then maybe set up goals throughout the year to measure again and again. And YNAB helps with that kind of thing. It makes it a lot easier than doing it in Excel or doing it on Google Sheets. If you can commit to doing that, then you'll be way better off than if you ignore it, so that it doesn't become something that is just this elephant in the room every time you think about your personal finances. Instead, you can measure it one little bit at a time throughout the year.
And if you have been using some sort of tool to measure, then it will help you assess your trajectory. And so what I mean like by that is that your spending may have changed during the course of the pandemic. So you might need a new baseline as it pertains to, what is the trajectory of my finances and where am I trying to go? So let's say as an example that maybe, you're in a tough financial situation pre-pandemic. And the pandemic didn't help at all. Or maybe the pandemic actually did help. I know I've heard a lot of people say they weren't able to go out as much. They weren't able to spend as much. So they were able to work on paying down credit card debt. So now you're going and you're assessing your trajectory. It's like, okay, someone who's coming, an outsider looking in may say, oh, this person has credit card debt and they have student loan debt and they have blah, blah, blah. And they don't look like they're in a great financial situation. But that new baseline for you is saying, hi, I had $50,000 of credit card debt and now I'm down to $25,000. I'm headed in the right direction. What steps can I take to continue these sorts of things as I go forward? And if we don't measure to know where we have been, we don't measure to know where we are, then we can't measure to know where we want to go.
Mm-hmm. And if you are doing this exercise and you've put some time into it, I would find ways to, if you feel comfortable, share that, maybe not the exact numbers, but share your progress or share where you're at with someone you trust. So that could be your significant other if you haven't made that part of the regular discussion. It could also be your best friend if you feel comfortable sharing that information. It could be your parents. But I think if you share something new that you're doing, then you can get behind that, get excited about it, rather than you're looking at your budget in a vacuum and it's already not that exciting. And if you don't do something to make it somewhat exciting, to tell someone where you are now and then make a goal, whether it's written down or in your head, of being somewhere further on, like from 50,000 to 40,000 in credit card debt. You could reflect that in percentages. You could say that my goal is to move my net worth from 50,000 to 40,000. So my goal is -50 to -40. My goal is to move my net worth by X percent. And you could share that percentage with someone else and say that I'm moving up. And maybe in 3 months, I'm hoping to come back to you and say that I've accomplished that. And if I haven't, then, well, I'll buy coffee this time.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, to write it down and make it real. Say it out loud. That also makes it very real. And to take something from in your head or, in theory or in thought to, hey, there's someone who now knows this, so I feel more accountable to it, is a great way to make sure that you continue to make progress on your finances. I know that's been very helpful for me. And I think too about, the people that we interact with, and it's like, oh, we've been told, like, don't talk about your finances. Don't say these things. It's embarrassing if you have $50,000 of credit card debt and you still got 25,000. You might not want to tell anyone, but you don't want to kind of suffer silently when there's certainly someone in your life that cares about you. Like you said, whether that's a friend or a family member who's going to want to see you do great and want to cheer for you along the way. So instead of thinking about the shamefulness of saying that thing out loud, think about how it would feel to have some support to say, like, hey, let's not get these drinks tonight. That's $12 you could be putting towards your credit card debt. Like, let's stay home and get a, $12 bottle of wine instead. Imagine how cool it could be if you shared it with someone that cares about you and you had additional support to be able to go after your goals.
Yeah. And your friends, they care about you. They do want to help you. They do want to support. Sometimes they just don't have, when it comes to personal finances, most friends don't have the information at hand to help support you emotionally or with peer pressure or non-peer pressure tactics. What they want is to spend time with you, to have fun with you. And if you can give them boundaries, I guess, that you're trying to live within your personal finances, and they know what's great for you and they can have fun at the same time within those boundaries, then it won't feel so much like this, oh, so-and-so's on a budget. Like they can't have fun. It's more like, well, actually, we both like going on walks on the boardwalk. We both like going down to the riverfront, and we can BYO to that if we want to, if it's allowed.
Right. If that's something that you're into. So.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about as it pertains to measuring your new financial normal is the number of people who became self-employed during the pandemic. So many people were just like, you know what? I am tired of working for someone else. They were furloughed or laid off or even fired during the pandemic, and they had to figure out like what to do to earn income next. So I think we're seeing a huge explosion of small businesses and people who have ventured out on their own. But it is incredibly important, when, you're not getting a normal paycheck every 2 weeks, to measure your finances, to really figure out what your trajectory is, and to be really intentional about how you're going to spend your dollars as you build a business. Because, we all have done that ramp up. I know Dan and I both have as small business owners. We go out on our own. Some money is coming in, but it's maybe just covering the expenses. But then you also have these living expenses at home to take care of. So I think that's also a great thing for new business owners to do, is to be measuring both the business finances and your personal finances as part of your new normal.
Yeah, measuring it's important, and it's important to be as organized as you can be from this day forward. If you feel like you haven't been that organized with how you spend from the business, when you start a new business, and I'm not an accountant, what my accountant tells me, keep things very separate as much as you can. When you're starting a business, if you do have startup expenses, you're going to be using personal savings to do that. And so that's okay. Like, transfer cash into a business checking account, or track it, and maybe do it in lump sums rather than $3 or $4 or $5 at a time. Like, transfer money from personal savings, call it an owner contribution into your business or something to startup costs. And then after that, you're going to have expenses that start up immediately, like ongoing recurring expenses for subscriptions, whatever it may be. If you can make sure to set up those subscriptions with your business checking account, then it'll be a lot easier to measure it down the road, rather than have things come from a bunch of different personal credit cards or personal checking accounts, one little bit at a time. You're making it really difficult, and it gets even more difficult the longer time goes on to separate those expenses. So I guess the first thing with starting a small business, if you have, is try to switch everything to business, paid by the business, anything that's recurring. That'll make it easier to measure. And then when you are going through and measuring your expenses, it's okay probably in that first year to use Excel, but I would quickly move on to YNAB or some tool to measure things on an ongoing basis and then project expenses on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for small business owners. All right, well, let's move on to talking goals post-pandemic. We've got all kinds of different goals that we set. And I think, with the year winding down, the new year coming, people wanting to kind of think about what life after pandemic looks like. I think now we're making goals based on like, what do we want to accomplish in 2022? And one of the big things that I think people are thinking about, like I said, it's top of mind. We just talked about small businesses, is career goals. Some people have moved to a more remote lifestyle, and there's all kinds of different moving parts. Dan, what do you think about goal creating as it pertains to career goals?
I think that if you're by yourself and you're having the conversation with me, myself, and I, then do what makes you happy. That could be working remotely. That could be living somewhere where your expenses are less, and that goes hand in hand maybe with working remotely. I just ran into someone recently who started working at Amazon, and that person's job has been from the start 100% remote for the last 6 months. And so what this person has been doing is driving from city to city, seeing friends, and instead of paying rent, using what they would have been paying towards rent, for paying for an Airbnb, and working, making sure that there's good Wi-Fi there. But that's just what's making that person happy right now. And eventually, I think that person is going to probably settle down and like find a place that is enjoyable. But for something like that, I think the post-pandemic goal is to find something. And during the pandemic, it's just, well, while we're 100% remote, there's no requirement to be in an office. I'm going to see a bunch of places and see what I really like in the United States.
Yeah, I think it's given a lot of people opportunity to be able to explore the country. Like you said, reallocate their expenses in one way or another to decide, give me some flexibility. Where do I want to live? What do I want to do? But there's also people I think that have experienced a decrease in income and were forced to live off of less during the course of the pandemic. So they've adjusted their they've adjusted their lifestyle accordingly, and now they realize they don't have to have this big mortgage or have these, excessive expenses. And they're like, oh, I'm really happy when I'm outside in nature. And it's given them that freedom to say, like, okay, well, let me go explore ways to, live off of less, but also live in a way that's going to make me more excited. And I think this is a great time for people who, have tons and tons of student loan debt. This is the Student Loan Planner podcast, to explore new career opportunities. I think so often people feel pigeonholed by, I went and I got this degree. It's a 6-figure student loan debt that now I'm paying back, but I'm not really happy in this work. I think if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's that time is of the essence. We say things like that. It is that thing that is priceless. And you can't spend your time doing something that you're unhappy in specifically because you're like, oh, I already chose this road. I can't go a different way. If you are a physician and, you don't feel called to medicine anymore, it's okay to leave that 6-figure debt behind, because you can make a plan in light of whatever your new income is going to be in your new career field. Same thing. We hear lawyers all the time talking about burnout after being in big law for, 4 or 5 years. But they're always like, oh my goodness, the student loan debt, the student loan debt. The student loan debt does not have to stop you from achieving whatever your career goals are. And if you've done some reflecting during the course of the pandemic and decided that a remote lifestyle is going to be more appropriate for you, or that you just don't like your career, it's okay to choose a new location. It's okay to say, I'm going to take a decrease in income and I'm going to go live off of less. You just need to, like you said, go back to that step one we were just talking about, budget accordingly, and then understand that there's these income-driven repayment plans that will allow you to stay in good standing with your student loans and not really derail your overall life. This is just one portion of your life. You don't need to make your decisions just based specifically on your student loans.
And if your student loans do happen to be on the lower side of things and you've got maybe a couple years left, and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel because your plan is to pay it down to zero instead of follow an income-driven plan. We do see that occasionally. If that's you and you're trying to figure out what you want to do post-pandemic, and you know that with your federal loans, the payment freeze is ending in February, I say this in consults. When the interest rate turns back on in February, it's like you're swimming in a river and the current is strong. And right now, the river's at a standstill. There is no current. So if you are on a pay it down to zero strategy, this is an opportunity between now and then to accelerate your pay down to zero amounts and maybe accelerate decisions that you've been putting off because you have your student loans for your career or for other goals that you have post-pandemic. What you could do as an exercise mentally or write it down is reflect on what you did pre-pandemic as a spender, as a consumer out there. For example, if you were a shopper and you would go to the mall often and that was your thing, and then malls shut down or you just didn't want to go because of X, Y, or Z reasons during the pandemic, if going back to the mall is going to make you really, really happy when you feel comfortable doing that, then do it. But maybe this time around, you're more intentional about how you do it and how much you spend or where you go and how much time you spend doing that. I'm saying that like I really enjoyed going to the mall.
That was not your thing, but it is some people's thing. And I think you bring up a really good point about being intentional about where you spend. So as it pertains to goal setting, I know, like you said, there were a lot of different events last year that caused people to rethink the way that they're doing life. And we also talked about, like you said, a bunch of small businesses popping up. But when I think about being intentional with my spending, it is supporting small businesses and not nickel and diming. So what we're prone to do is try to save $1 for ourselves. So we want to negotiate, we want to, get the hookup, get the discount, etc. And it's not that those things are bad, but if you are now a small business owner, I think you can feel the pain of, maybe having to charge higher cost than a big conglomerate does because there's a lot more cost associated with whatever product or service that you're providing. So you now can understand the other small business owners. I think that's kind of how my trajectory changed or my thought process around being intentional around my spending is. So, can I go to big store XYZ and get a candle for $3? Yes, probably. But if there's someone who makes candles, I know that they got to buy those jars. They got to, put a label on it. They had to come up with the targeting and the logo, whatever. And so their thing is maybe $15, but there's a lot of cost built into that candle that they're made. There was a lot of love and effort put into it. They want to be off on their own, and I want to help them and support them be off on their own. So some of that money is going to the actual cost, but some of that they need to make a living. And so I'd much rather, look for a candle place online that is a small business or a female-owned business or a business with people of color, and be more intentional about spending that $15 versus like, I like candles, I'm going to go get a candle from XYZ place. So as we reassess what our goals are, one of your goals could be to be more intentional about where you spend. I know a lot of people also, are getting into like ESG investing and socially responsibly investing and things like that. I think a really great first step, though, is where you spend your basic dollars on a monthly basis and trying to figure out how you can reroute some of your normal monthly expenses to a place that feels a lot better and feels a lot more like you're making a socially responsible decision.
Yeah, I think about last year in Chicago. Normally, there are festivals going on every weekend. Not block parties, more like streets blocked off for small businesses, vendors. Almost all of them were canceled in 2020, and a lot of people felt that. Whereas beforehand, living in Chicago before that, I didn't hardly notice. I knew that there were a lot of festivals going on, or I don't know if I would call them festivals, but more like opportunities for small businesses to come into Chicago, set up a booth, and the streets blocked off, and there are thousands of people walking by. They're trying to sell their wares. And prior to the pandemic, me as an onlooker just walking by, I kind of took them for granted because there was one every weekend. And then last year, almost none during the summer. And this year, yesterday, I was walking by just a couple blocks away from me. There's just happened a bunch of people set up for about 200 yards of booths. And it was really exciting just to walk by them and look and go through those same thoughts of this person got up this morning at 4 a.m. They set up all of these things like beads that probably took hours for every single glass bead that they created. And then they're selling it for, if you think about it that way, a huge discount. But it's something that they enjoy doing. It's a hobby that they've monetized. And I would much rather support that than going to a large name store to buy something that looks similar that's manufactured.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Dan, in thinking about, like you said, where can I spend my dollars in my community, and just being aware of what's happening in your community as well. As we transition to other goals that I can think of, vacations is something like you talked about, getting out and walking down that street. But I know other people are really excited about getting out and getting on their vacation for the first time. So maybe you're still waiting to travel and you've not had the privilege because it's been taken away due to your unique circumstances related to the pandemic. I know we've all seen people on Instagram go here, there, and everywhere, go places a lot cheaper, but we all have our own unique set of circumstances. So what should we be thinking about as it pertains to goals for vacation, Dan?
I think if you can't go on a vacation today, you could plan that vacation that you're going to do tomorrow. Or you could, if you don't know where you're going to go yet, because everything is kind of in swing, you could make a template. I mean, that's an idea. You could think about what you used to do when you would go on a vacation, whether it was out of state or out of country, maybe separate them and write down the different things that you would go through every time. I know for me, for instance, every time we leave Chicago, someone's got to watch our dogs. So we got to either, if it's a really short leave, a couple days, maybe we'll ask and pay a friend or buy them dinner afterwards. If it's longer than 1 or 2 nights, we're probably taking our dog to paying for overnight care. Booking that out, I know that small business really appreciates it if we book it further out in advance. So writing that down is a step in the process, and thinking through whether I'm taking the bus and the train to the airport, or I'm driving and parking, or we're Ubering there because we're going together. And I'll sit on the train, no problem. I'll sit on the bus, no problem. Maybe my wife wants to go in an Uber because there's 2 of us and there's more bags. Who knows? But thinking through what you're going to do based on how long you're going to be gone and where you're going, and writing it down, documenting it, might make it easier to go through it. Because when you do plan a vacation, it can be stressful in those weeks leading up to it to make sure that everything is lined up with work and everything's lined up at home so that you can shut the door and lock it and leave without thinking, did I forget something?
Yeah, I think those are really good things to be thinking about. And as I think about goals and vacations, so travel is like my thing. I love, 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 love to travel. I am now at 48 countries, and I'm not sure how many states. My app kind of broke, so I have to recount, but I think I'm at 38 states.
Wow.
But when we think about goal setting, it's where do you want to go? When do you want to go? What's my list of priorities as it pertains to going, and what other things am I up against? So we saw home buying explode during the pandemic. I think people were on top of each other, like, I can't take this anymore. The uncertainty, they want to have their own space that they feel like they have some ownership over. But is vacation and travel something that is near and dear to your heart and something that you definitely want to do? You might consider, maybe buying a smaller place that's going to be, not your dream home per se, but it frees you up on a monthly basis to have more money. So you have a smaller mortgage, now you have more discretionary income, which allows you to be able to travel more. For me, I didn't want to have to worry about that at all. So there's no mortgage. Like, I don't want that to be my monthly expenses. So I hurried up on the front end to make sure I got my house paid off, so that now, like, everybody else is paying the mortgage and I'm like, woohoo, it's vacation time. Where are we going next? So what do you truly want? I think, customizing your goals as it pertains to travel and vacation to you. Do you want more weeks off per year? Now is a great time to negotiate that. Like I said, we've already talked about being remote and being able to work and also be in a fun place. But I think it's also important to say it's important to take time off, which is what I really struggle with. It's like my computer goes everywhere with me, so I can be in Colombia and also be working. You do need to do some self-care and not be doing vacation and work or workations all the time.
Yeah. A lot of us were thrown into this. Well, everybody was thrown into this pandemic on the work side with facing working at home. And some people loved that at first and hated that later, and some people loved that at first and continue to love that today. And that's become something that's important to them is not having a commute. But if you're someone that is sitting in the camp of, I really need some separation from home and work, I'm just not able to right now. Maybe one of your goals post-pandemic, and thinking about maybe not where you vacation, but where you live, is to create that separation and be able to close the door to your home office, and outside of that room, you're at home.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that becomes a new goal, or as you're thinking about where you want to be. People have also gone into, especially if they've in the camp of being self-employed during the pandemic, switching, thinking about, well, do they want to pay for a remote office, or not a remote office, but another office for themselves, like a WeWork type of situation.
Mm-hmm.
I would just met with a peer advisor through our network in Portland. He's renting a space, and, at home, there is a home office, but he knows that he's most productive in an office that he can rent. And also it's easier to meet people eventually, to plan to meet people in person who are clients. He wants to have them not drive to his house. He'd rather, and not meet them at a Starbucks for coffee. He wants to have a dedicated location that they can meet him at. And that's a new expense that pre-pandemic he didn't have to think about, because being W-2 self-employed, your employer solved that for you.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a great point about the working from home. My office is upstairs in our house. So if I wanted to see clients in person, like, they'd have to like walk through my kitchen, walk upstairs, maybe see the other bedrooms if I didn't close the door. Like, you definitely want to consider environment as it pertains to goal setting, and what is it that you want to accomplish? Where are you going to be most productive, and what environment is going to be best? And I think that also brings to our next point, our last point about relationships. So we've been in this remote world. We've been so far away from one another. Everything's been happening virtually. People are now shifting back to doing business in person. But there's also just like the relationship component of all aspects of your life. Relationships with clients or consumers that you work with, relationships with friends and family. There's people that you probably haven't seen in years. It could have been, 2018, and you're like, oh, I'm going to get to them in 2019. And, life happened in 2019, and you're just like, you were ready to go. You had your trip all planned in 2020, and then this pandemic came. So now it's been years since you've seen some real loved ones. And I think we need to think about how we manage relationships post-pandemic. Dan, what do you think?
So I think when I think about relationships post-pandemic, I'm thinking about all the people that I have excluded from my inner circle for one reason or another. Like, some of it may just be because someone in the family is immunocompromised. It could also be that they're just not within walking distance in Chicago. They're friends from college that are, or grad school, maybe, that are just in another city, and it's not high enough on the priority list because the first thing most of us probably prioritized was family and how to see them safely, and making choices because of that to not see other people. So I think I would expect that relationships post-pandemic become a priority simply because you haven't seen someone in a hot minute and you want to continue that relationship, maybe pick up where you left off. That's going to feel maybe overwhelming at first. And so from my perspective as a planner, not just financial planning, but planning life, I think about what I can do now while I have time before whatever plans or trips happen to mitigate that anxiety or that feeling of being overwhelmed by all these things that you want to do with X amount of money to do it. And so if relationships and seeing certain people are really important, write it down, document it. And then if you have it written down, then you can prioritize that list and think about setting expectations for seeing those people further in advance rather than, I really want to see my friend from college, so I'm going to book a flight for next week. That's very different than, I really want to see my friend from college when the pandemic ends. And so I'm going to reach out to him or her and say, hey, 8 months from now, I'm thinking I'd like to come down to Charleston and see you. What do you think?
And I know so many people are stressed with the feeling of time. So we talked about time being like priceless and tomorrow not being promised and tons of other cliches around time. I think time feels more valuable than ever, especially if you lost a loved one in light of the pandemic or COVID-19. So it's like, oh my goodness, I just want to do it now. I got to go see everybody. I got to make sure that I lay eyes on all these people. But, there's also, like you said, thinking about it from a financial standpoint and thinking about it from what is appropriate from a safety standpoint based on what your family believes or is going to do. So to budget ahead and say, how can I make this a cost efficient thing? Like you said, we gave you lots of great tips for things that you can do once you get there even. So going for a walk outside, going for a picnic in the park, there's tons of ways that we've decided to interact with one another and to build relationships in light of what's been going on that you can continue to carry out as you get to starting to travel or starting to interact more with people that you maybe have not been in contact with recently. I think now more than ever, we've been creative as it pertains to cool ways to interact at work conferences, cool things you can do that aren't necessarily virtual for those that you care about, but you have not been in close contact with. And we know that there are lots of different ways to stay safe and do things that are sanitary so that you feel comfortable from a pandemic standpoint while interacting. So those relationships are important. They are very valuable. And I think you should figure out the best way for you to see the people that you love and care about post-pandemic or even now.
Awesome. Great. Well, it's been a pleasure recording this podcast with you, Lauryn. Hopefully these 3 ideas about how to plan for a new normal after the pandemic have sparked conversation or will spark conversation between you, yourself, or you, yourself, and your significant other, or you and family, whatever it may be, whoever it may be with. We really hope that this just provides fodder for better planning, and know that you can only plan so much. So do also leave room for spontaneity. And also I'd throw in that the more you plan, the more room there is for spontaneity without the added stress of having to be spontaneous, coming from someone who is a huge planner. So hope you enjoyed it. And by the way, this topic came up from crowdsourced information on social media. So if there are other things that you want to hear us talk about, please do post about them on any of our social media platforms. We are watching, we are listening, and we want to bring relevant topics and information to our listeners. So have a great rest of your week.
And of course, don't forget that if you want to have a consultation to get your plan in place, so We're talking about measuring our new financial normal. You need help creating a student loan plan to be able to do that. You need help setting goals for what your student loan plan should be post-pandemic, or you need help getting the student loan plans all together so that it's not impacting those relationships, because we've got lots of people reaching out to us saying, hey, I can't get married because my significant other knows about this six-figure student loan debt. So don't be afraid to book a call. We're at studentloanplanner.com. It's a 60-minute consultation. It comes with 6 months of email support, and we're happy to help you achieve your financial goals.